Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. As always, here with my co-host and Hall of Famer, Steve Flink. I usually have a smile on my face, Steve, when we start these. I think it's a little bit wider now because, you got to get up, and I'll give the standing O. You look way too comfortable there, but we got to give a standing O to Coco Gauff, Novak Djokovic, and Carlos Alcaraz. That was some performances by all three of them. I actually feel a little. I don't know if Coco feels bad about it. I don't think she does, and I don't think she should. I almost feel like maybe her unbelievable week and unbelievable summer was maybe overshadowed because of what happened late yesterday afternoon and into the evening with Novak and Carlos. Just an incredible Sunday for every tennis fan out there.
It was. No, Coco would have been the story. If there'd been a straight set win for either Carlos or Novak in the final, there would have been a lot more talk about Coco. But I don't think she's going to be too concerned with that. She got her second tournament win in her last three events and comes in to the Open flying high. So she'll more than forfeit the extra attention to have the win.
Steve, could you ask for any better prep from Coco? We always talk about these back-to-back events are really hard. You win one in DC, you may lose early the next one. We saw it this week with Pegula and Sinner. They went out early. Coco wins DC. She quarters Montreal, loses a close three-setter to Jess, and she wins Cincy. There's no better prep than she could have flying high with confidence going into New York.
Well, to me, it's the confidence above all else. And fortunately for her, that was a quarterfinal against Pegula that she lost. So that she spared herself two more matches there. That would probably have really made it that much tougher to come through in Cincinnati the way she did. It also just gave her the extra incentive because she wanted to rebuild that winning feeling again, having done it at DC. So, but it just was, to her, the semifinal was the final.
And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that later. Yeah. And before we talk about Carlos and Novak, we don't want to undervalue the preparation that Coco has had, how well she has played, and we're going to get into it. But let's start with the magnificent final yesterday. There were so many swings, both sides. First, let me talk about the conditions, because I'm in Chicago. People know you're in New York. Yesterday, at least in Chicago, Steve, it was brutally humid. It was hot, okay? But we can deal with the heat, right? It was probably the most humid day of the summer in Chicago yesterday. And I looked at the conditions in Cincinnati, and it was pretty much identical. You stepped outside, and it was a frying pan. We call this humidity like the energy zappers. And to set it up for someone like Novak, if you remember, right? Not only is Novak's first tournament since Wimbledon, but the few matches he had played up to the final were all at night, Steve. This was his first time during the day.
Yeah, it was. And not to mention that he just played one set against Davidovich Fokina, who then got hurt. And then he destroyed Monfils. He was rolling through that. He had a 21-minute first set against Fritz and beat him 11-4. And then finally a 2-hour tough two-setter against Sasha Zverev. But that was his longest match. And as you say, all at night. It was brutally hot. And Carlos had been playing day matches. That's what ends up happening in these tournaments. Once you get the day slot, you keep playing in the day, but they don't end up, I've seen it through the years, and it always works out that way, that once they've started you at night, you're probably going to stay at night. I will say this, David. Look, these were two gladiators out there. This was just phenomenal performances on both sides of the net. And Novak overcame what was more than heat. He thought it was some kind of a heat stroke almost. It was serious. And, he took off. He went into the locker room after the first set, changed his clothes, and came back, and you could see in his face, looked very red in his face. He did not look well. And when he went down 4-2 in the second, I just thought this is one of these times he's not going to be able to come back. But fortunately, as you pointed out, as we discussed on the phone, the sun was receding and now the court was getting shaded.
Yeah, I want to get to that. I want to get to that point. But before we get to that key moment of the match with 4-2 in the second set, it started okay for Novak. He got up a break early.
It started more okay.
It was up 4-2.
He played one of his best return games of the match to break at love for 4-2. hit 3 really deep returns, won the game of the forehand inside in winner. It was a perfect return game. He'd set himself up. And then the next game is when the trouble started. He had 15 love, and then Carlos hit a great backhand winner down the line on the run, and Novak made some errors. The next thing you know, they're back on serve. You could see already he was starting to look uncomfortable because he was on the sunnier side at that point. And it got worse. Although he won one more game in that set, managed one more hole, he lost at 7-5, and he was just making routine errors. And you could see, and Carlos could see it too. So Carlos sort of tamped things down, stopped going for so much. Didn't feel like he had to hit the winners. He just tried to keep the ball deep into play. He was restrained. He was very smart at exploiting Novak's physical vulnerability. But fortunately, just in the nick of time in that middle of the second set for Novak, Carlos played a loose game on his serve. He was up 4-2, and then Novak.
And I put out at that moment, Steve, at 4-2, I put out a tweet because. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest. There are a lot of matches I see where I kind of maybe want one player a little bit over another, just a preference here or there. When these two guys play, I don't care. I just want more tennis, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so good to watch. So I'm thinking to myself, and you mentioned earlier in the conversation, the shadows at 4-2 in the second set when it was, and Novak did not look good, right? He was down 7-5, 4-2. One side of the court was completely shaded,
right?
The other one was still at sunny. And I put on Twitter, I said, Novak just needs to hold on for another 15 minutes because that's all it was going to take to get that other side in a shadow. Now, again, I'm not saying Novak, just because that happens, Novak would win, Carlos would lose. But as you know, and people know, 91 degrees with sunshine and 91 degrees without sunshine is very different. Still, it's hot. Don't get me wrong. But when it's 91 degrees without sunshine, that is a saver for a guy like Novak Djokovic in that situation.
It is. But look, the heat's contained. The heat is reflecting off the hard court. So as they were saying on the air, it may have been officially 91, 92. It felt like 98 or 99. Frankly, I don't think that's a good thing. I really don't. I think that these tournaments, which are making a lot of money, would be well served, the Cincinnati's, the Canadas, all of them, to get roofs. And in extreme conditions, we talk about it in Australia. So on a day like this, you just would put the roof up and say, guys, we're gonna give you the best conditions possible. It's dangerously hot. And it was clear it was dangerously hot because you don't see Djokovic in that state unless he's been put into a frying pan. And it was more than just having been his first tournament back. It was just a brutally hot day. And it was murder. It was very tough on Carlos too, don't get me wrong. And they're icing ice around the shoulders and neck at the changeovers. And you could see how tough it was on both players. But that's what made Djokovic's comeback all the more remarkable, is that Carlos plays a loose game. He started trying to go for too much, made a 3 backhand errors, 1 forehand unforced error, and loses his serve in the 4-3 game. And suddenly it's 4-all, and Djokovic, a light went off. You could see him raise his racket like, okay, I'm back in this. And he played a couple of really good service games after that. Carlos managed to hold on to his 2, and in we go to the tiebreak. That second set tiebreak was terrific, David, because Novak had a 3-1 lead, and Carlos drew him in with a drop shot, and Novak did a pretty good job of steering his forehand down the line, and Carlos hits the pass hard, and Novak makes a nice backhand volley, but Carlos calmly passes him down the line. Big point, because it got him back into the breaker, and it got him back on serve. And then the next thing you know, Novak is serving at 5-6 match point down. And then he came up with a clutch serve to the backhand of Carlos right in the corner that set up a really nice deep forehand. No way for Carlos to get it back. And although Djokovic didn't seal it on his first set point, he got it on the second in a long rally, I believe 20 strokes. And finally he drew an error from Carlos after they were kind of, they were strategically going after each other with slice backhands, mixing everything up, and Novak finally played a short angle backhand that drew the error from Carlos. Just a great.
I noticed, Steve, in the tiebreaker, we talk so much about how good Novak returns, right, and how much he gets locked in on tiebreakers too. To me, in that tiebreaker, he ripped 3 unbelievable service returns to Carlos. Only Carlos could handle these, and he won 2 of those 3 points. The one he lost was at 7-7. Novak ripped another return. I think Carlos missed the forehand cross court.
Yeah.
But there were 3 points, Steve, that Novak ripped those returns. hard down the middle, and
He
only
did, but
Carlos could handle.
Carlos fended those off beautifully, and a couple of times, and Novak, would come back with another deep shot. But Carlos is underrated as a defender because of his movement, and he's just so determined, and he knows how to play defense. And we don't talk about that enough, but he can do it, and he showed it there. But it was great from Djokovic because the first set point he made a forehand error, but he got right back on the return that you mentioned, and then won the long rally. And he wins it 9 points to 7, and now that's really when it was like a brand new match, because the second set was very well played, particularly toward the end and then the tiebreak. But the third set was simply out of this world.
I mean, Steve, the 3-3 game in the third set, it was ridiculous, right? And the fifth break point, Novak converts. Is that it was
yeah,
and there were so many long games in that.
Yeah, and he'd already had a 2 or 3 earlier in the 2-all game, and he wasn't able to get him. At 3-all, he finally did. Carlos was terrific. He fended off, I think, altogether 16 out of 19 break points, and he was very stubborn on those break points. And he's particularly tough, by the way, in the ad court, because he can do so many things with his serve. He's got the nice kicker, short and wide, which he can sometimes turn into serve and volley. He can disguise it and go down the tee. It's I think a lot of the break points, he's very tough to deal with in that ad court. So, but yes, you mentioned it, 3-all. I thought that we all thought that was probably going to be the decisive break. And then Novak holds on nicely in the next game, and it's 5-3, and he set himself up for it. And as he said later, I almost had the double break, and he did, because of the first 2 match points were on Carlos's serve.
The match point at 3-5 was ridiculous that Carlos saved.
But David, before we get to the ridiculous one, let's not forget, on the first one, Carlos plays a surprise serve and volley. Novak's return is not bad. It's a cross-court backhand return. It could have been a little lower, but it was certainly respectable. Carlos looked like a vintage serve and volleyer on that point. He just hits it, got a little side spin on his backhand volley, sent it down the line. Novak scampers over and tries to make the lob. Doesn't miss it by too much, but he missed it. And that was a really clever point from Carlos on the first one. Then the second one was crazy because he drop shotted. Obviously, Novak was probing, and then Carlos drop shots, and Novak got to it in time. He got to it fairly easily, but not enough that he could put it away. He was able to hit it cross court off his backhand fairly deep. He read Carlos's down the line backhand pass and tried to angle off that forehand volley. If he'd been able to get just a little more angle, a little shorter, I think it's over. But even what he did was still good enough that you figure he's got the .1. And somehow Carlos, seemingly with time to spare, goes over there and still has not a lot of room down the line. Novak is covering the line, and Carlos makes the down the line forehand pass to perfection to save that. And that's when Novak smiled. He had that kind of wry, sardonic smile, and he commented on that point couple of times after the match in different interviews, how he couldn't believe that point. So there's the first 2, and then Carlos ends up holding. I mean, obviously that would have been the easiest way to close, just break him again and not have to serve it out. But because Carlos has saved those 2 match points, now Novak has to think about it at the changeover. You could see he was tense trying to serve it out, and he served a double fault that put him down 15-40. Long, very well long. And you thought, oh boy. And then he still manages to get back to the ad as his match point. He hits that double fault into that. That was the one thing he would have been really hard on himself for if he'd ever lost a match, was the double fault that was measured at like 65 miles an hour. He said later, that's the slowest second serve I think I've hit in my whole career. And he admitted, he said, I was tight. I like it when guys admit that, by the way. I frankly felt that was something Roger never liked to do. Fair enough. Everybody has self-protection ways about them. But Novak has a couple of times where he says, I just got tight. That's all there is to it. And, it was a long 4-deuce game.
It was over a 12-minute game, Steve.
Yeah, no. And he still later fended off a break point with a 120-mile-an-hour serve down the tee that's set up a huge forehand that Carlos couldn't get back, and then Novak pointed to his head. So there were moments you thought he was going to salvage that game. But then the 4th match point, he played the point perfectly well, and then Carlos just rips a forehand down the line winner. You didn't really think he had an opening for a winner, but he hit one of those immense forehands of his that you don't necessarily see it coming. He just unleashes, and suddenly it's 10, 12 miles an hour faster, maybe 15 miles an hour faster. There was no way for even Novak, who's such a great defender, to make a move to defend it out of his backhand corner, just a clean winner. And then, of course, Novak missed that smash on the bounce. He had too much time to think about it. He'd come in, and Carlos hits that deep lob, and Novak retreats, takes the overhead on the bounce, and rather than really crunch it the way he should have, you could see he was guiding it and sliced it out wide. And
that was really the only overhead he missed. There were some big points where he had to hit some overheads, and Novak, that's one of his weakest shots, and he came up big yesterday.
He played a couple of really good overheads in the second set tiebreak too. On the 3-4 point, Carlos lobbed the return. Novak hits a pretty good smash, and Carlos lobs deep, really deep, and Novak puts it away down the line, no less, for a winner. His overhead had been good, but those were normal lobs taken out of the air. This one was on the bounce, and I think it was the only bounce smash he played in the whole match. And then that was a blow. Then we're at 5-all, and we have another marathon 4-deuce game, and Novak has 4 break points, 15-40, and 2 more adds. And he missed one forehand that he shouldn't have, and Carlos played all the others beautifully, particularly the last 2, with that kick serve short and wide in the ad court and coming in behind it. And that was tough for Novak to fend off.
He kicks it so short. You mentioned it earlier. He kicks it in the box on the ad side so short that it's really a bad angle if you're a defender.
And it bounds up high, and there's not a lot you got to really anticipate it. And Novak did the best he could, but that was another frustrating game because you think about it, David. Here's Novak with 2 match points with Carlos serving at 3-5, 2 more match points on his own serve, and then 4 break points on Carlos's serve. And yet he didn't win any of those games. And it was 38 points. To lose 3 games in a row, that hard fought with so many chances. Now go sit at the changeover at 5-6, knowing you're serving to stay in the match. That was psychologically, that had to be very tough. And they go around, and Novak loses the first point because Carlos hit a back-end return, not a chip and charge, he just hit the back-end return cleanly and came in behind it. It was a rip and charge, and
his legs, he was starting to get tired. His legs were starting to go, and you saw him starting to come to net more to just try to end these points earlier, and he did very well coming in.
He did well because also he had to get down low for that volley. Novak's pass was pretty good, and Carlos got down low and made the drop volley, and suddenly it's love 15. Novak having lost 3 games in a row, now 3 points from defeat. And he played the rest of that game like the ultimate professional.
He won the next 4 points. I think he won that game at 15, I think.
He did. He won the next 4 points. It started with a perfect second serve down the tee at 96 miles an hour that Carlos couldn't get back into place, perfectly placed. And then he kind of followed his next serve in, played a drive volley that set up a little drop volley that Carlos couldn't get. And then it was, then a service winner to the backhand and then a forehand winner off the return. Played those 4 points masterfully and remarkably, considering what he had just endured in the previous 3 games. And I think that brought him into the tiebreak in a positive frame of mind. Then, of course, we had the early drama in the tiebreak because that long rally on Carlos double faults wide on the first point, which was surprising. He didn't give himself enough. He should have given himself a little more margin down the tee, but it just missed by a whisper.
Thought he got it. Yeah, it just missed down the tee.
The replay showed it couldn't have been any closer. So he was a bit unlucky, but it's a double fault. And then we have the 29-stroke rally. And on the last shot, Carlos, that's when he went to the 2-handed forehand because his hand was cramping. And you thought you immediately had it flashbacks to Paris and Roland Garros because the cramping there at the end of the second set had early in the third mainly. It started in his hand. But then it became full body cramp. So that was my first thought. Oh my God, is this going to be a repeat of Paris where he cramps all over? But obviously it did not happen. And actually, if anything, the hand cramp didn't get too bad. I mean, I'm sure it was still on his mind though, but he was able to come back after Novak got to 3-love in the breaker and make it 3-all, 4-all. He came in tried to come in a few times there too. Novak missed a few backhands, and there we are, 3-all, 4-all, and you still see this thing hanging in the balance. But there, once again, a clutch effort from Novak because he's serving at 4-all. It's 4-all, and Carlos is serving, and Novak gets an opening for a forehand inside in and rips it pretty well into the corner. And Carlos tried to defend with the underspin and couldn't get it back. And so it's just like that. It's 5-4 serving. And you're wondering, can he serve it out? It's a perfect kick serve out wide. It was almost a Carlos type serve because he got it short, not too deep and very wide. And Carlos had to try to make the one-handed back in return, couldn't get it back in play. And then the second serve had a lot of spin on it at 6-4. and Carlos went for the big winner and missed it by a wide margin. There it was, 7 points to 4 for Djokovic. But it was just, it's mind-boggling when you think back over those series of games from the time that Djokovic got to 5-3 until the end of the match. That was just, it was spellbinding.
A couple things I was thinking about, and for the listeners, we were planning on recording after this match, and Steve and I talked shortly after and be like, you know what? We need to digest what we just witnessed a little bit. We wanted to take some time, which we did, and that's why we're recording now, Monday night. A couple things, how do you think this would play out if this was an hour earlier, Steve? Let's say the start of the match was an hour earlier. Then the shadows don't come. They don't come at 4-2 in the second set, maybe, right? You don't know. That's something that Novak's probably thankful for, that it started at the time it actually did start.
I think so, but thankfully for all of us, not just for the two players, but for what the match became, for what it turned into. We wouldn't have had that treat, because the third set was it was close to an hour and a half. I mean, and it was just gripping. And
3 hours and 49 minutes, Steve. How do you do this? If this is a slam final, 3 out of 5. I mean, look, these two guys it's war. You heard what Novak said. They were both so complimentary of each other, both Novak and Carlos. He said this reminded him, when he plays Carlos, it reminds him a bit of Rafa when they were both in their prime, where you're not getting any free points. He said maybe 5 free points the entire match.
Yeah, you just said it. Let's not sweep by what you just said. When we were in our primes, he said, fascinating considering how great he still is and how close he is to regaining the #1 ranking, that he would say that when Rafa and I were in our primes, and he put it in that context. That was a really interesting remark. But
so 3 out of 5, Steve. How do they do this?
Well, think about it. It takes those kind of sets, 5-7, 7-6, 7-6. Wimbledon, you had a 6-1 first set for Djokovic. Then you did have a tiebreak, which turned the match because Djokovic, had his chance to close it out there and wasn't able to do it on set point. And he missed that backhand, which was shocking, and it all turned, and he had a chance to win it and didn't. Then the third set was 6-3. There was one marathon game, 27 minutes. When Djokovic lost that at 3-1 to go down 4-1, he pretty much gave the set up. Then the fourth set was 6-3. Djokovic had the early break. He broke again late. That was not terribly taxing. And the fifth was 6-4. So you didn't have sets of this length or rallies of this length.
So let me compare it, because it was both done on hard courts. Is the 2012 Australian Open final with Novak and Rafa, which was 6 hours and 12 minutes or something.
5:50. You're only exaggerating slightly. It was
5 hours and 53 minutes or something.
Yeah, 5:53. So very close to 6. Yeah, I mean, again, fortunately there, considering how long it was, 5-7, 6-4, 6-2, 6-7, and then the long fifth set. So, I mean, there were a couple of sets there that weren't too long either, and then there were 3 that were quite long. It's 3 of the 5. So you need that, or else these guys are just going to collapse. I mean,
it just physically, these guys are pounding the ball, and to win a point, it's so hard to win a point against either.
Well, Carlos backed you up on that. That was an interesting part of his press conference. Novak gets so many balls back. He's getting 6 or 7 balls back every point. It's hard to deal with that, which was an interesting remark coming from a 20-year-old kid. But you could see that, that's partly what brings on the cramps, I think, is the exertion. I mean, the second set in Roland Garros was a very, very hard fought set. Much longer than the first. It was a killer but at least that was clay, and the heat doesn't reflect off the clay the same way. But here, no, he was, and you could see that he was feeling it at times too, not just the cramps, that he was just feeling that. He's talking about Novak running him from corner to corner, and that is just not easy when somebody can orchestrate rallies the way that Djokovic can.
And these both guys, the fighting spirit and both. I mean, you heard the on-court interview during the presentation with Novak, and he looked at Carlos and he goes, "Boy, you never give up." And, it was a fun little dialogue between both of them there.
No, it was a lot of fun and very respectful. And I mean, look, Djokovic is the one who alluded to it. The very first match they played, 3 hours, 36 minutes in Madrid last year, tiebreaker in the third to Carlos in the semis. Then they come back to Paris this year. That one would have been much longer if Carlos doesn't cramp, because they're 1 set all before he cramped, and then Novak rolls through the last 2. Then the 5-setter at Wimbledon, and now this. So it can't be any accident that every time they go out on the court against each other, they seem to push each other to the hilt.
And I don't know, like, does your mindset change a little? They haven't played 5 sets. They only played 5 sets at Wimbledon. They haven't played 5 sets on a hard court yet. You know, does your mindset change? I don't think it does with these two guys. These guys are absolute warriors, absolute fight for every single ball. I don't think their mindset changes if it's 3 out of 5 on a hard court. Be like, you got to conserve a little bit of energy early on. I don't think they're wired like that, Steve.
No, they're not. But if you have a situation like Novak encountered in the middle of the 3rd set of the Wimbledon final, where he was already down a break and he's fighting like crazy to win that 5th game in the last 27 minutes. And he's got so many chances to close it out, and he doesn't. Once he got down 4-1, then he pretty much said, okay, this set is over. You know, I'm not wasting more energy on this set trying to come back from 2 breaks down. So that can happen, but only that. Otherwise, it's hard. And it's something that's going to would be on their minds if they had, say, if they played the US Open final, it was something like 7-5, 5-7, 7-6, either way. You know, I mean, that already they probably would be past the 3.5-hour mark, knowing there could be 2 more sets.
Yeah. I mean, it was 3 hours and 49 minutes last night, and they only played 3 sets. I mean, let's hope. I mean, we all want to see it. Look, still a lot of things have to happen for it to be in place. But, you know, the final Sunday in New York, having those 2 guys, 3 out of 5 sets, they don't have to worry about resting for the next match, because that'll be it for them.
Well,
it would be unbelievable. It would be unbelievable.
You hope that the temperature's not anything over 80 that day too. And it's just healthier and better for the players, and much more
humidity that's the killer. I mean, you could do 85 if it's low humidity, but when it was humid as what it was like yesterday, it's just an energy zapper. It's a killer. But shout out to both those guys. Incredible match. I mean, again, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Best of 3 set match. It's the best one that I can remember off the top of my head.
Well, listen, mine too, and I've been racking my brain for the last day on it. You know, there's a couple that come to mind that I think were pretty extraordinary. Oddly, you'll like one of my choices, and that was back in 2002 in San Jose. Leighton Hewitt and Andre Agassi. There's a 4-6, 7-6, 7-6 for Hewitt. He fended off 19 out of 21 break points. The standard was incredibly high for 3 sets. Unbelievable rallies, and 2 real champions going at it toe-to-toe. That was a great one. And I think of a couple of Borg-McEnroe matches in 79 and 80 at the Masters that went to the final set tiebreak. And then I think of one more, and that's Nadal playing Djokovic in Spain back in 2009 in the semis, in a match that went 4 hours and 3 minutes. And Rafa saved 3 match points and won it in the 3rd set tiebreak over Novak, who left the court in tears. And that one was really remarkable too. But I don't think, considering what these guys produced in the 3rd set, I just can't rate any of them quite up on this level.
I want to emphasize what you said, because I mean, the first set and a half, and Novak was struggling. It wasn't like these guys were both peak shape for that first set and a half. It was, you know, Novak got up early. Carlos came back, wins the first set, is up 4-2 in the second. I think once it started 4-2 in the second and on, it was at a level that I cannot remember as good as I've seen it in a best of 3.
No, it was. And the thing was that Novak's level had dropped from 4-2 in the first for him to 4-2 down in the second set. His level had dropped considerably. Yes. And Carlos was playing very good tennis, but then everything changed by the middle of that second set. To me, David, I had this philosophy too when I wrote my book on the greatest matches of all time, is that the best matches, you want the best tennis to be toward the end, not the beginning.
Of course, because that's when the most drama is.
Yeah. So in other words, you take, say, Borg-McEnroe. The first set was 6-1 for John in 1980 at Wimbledon. And then the next 2 are 5-3. And then the drama all starts late in the 4th when he saves a couple of match points, gets into the tiebreak, saves 5 more, wins an 18-16 tiebreak, and they go 8-6 in the 5th. So that one just got the level started soaring and got better and better in the latter stages. Same thing with Roger and Rafa in the 08 Wimbledon themselves in the final, because Rafa won 2 fairly comfortable 6-4 sets. He did come back from 4-1 down in the second, but he was rolling through the first 2. Roger wins a tiebreak in the third. Roger saves 2 match points to win a tiebreak in the fourth, and then we had 9-7 in the fifth. So again, it just got better. Those last 3 sets were phenomenal. So I think ideally that's the way it should play out, is that you can have some one-sided sets earlier on. Labor Rosewall in Dallas in 72 was a beauty that went 7-6 in the fifth. And Rosewall said to me later, well, there was a 6-love. I won a 6-love set. That doesn't happen to Rodberry. That's true, but it was early. It was the second set. So by the fourth and fifth, there are a couple of tie breaks, and the match is moving to another level. So that's what happened here. From late in the second right through the third, it was just spectacular.
I was honored to be a tennis fan. I was honored to be associated with the sport yesterday. Watching those two guys go at it, it was absolutely incredible. And hey, let's see if we can make this happen on the final Sunday in the U.S. Open coming up.
Well, also it was great for the public, a great appetite increaser. Because I mean,
and John Wertheim said that on Twitter. He said Cincy, the U.S. Open owes Cincy big time, and that this was an unbelievable preview for New York.
It is, and now everybody will be rooting for this final. I was rooting for it here, and we'll hope it can be reprised in New York. And I think anybody who watched Cincinnati, any tennis fan who watched it there, has got to be hoping that it happens again in New York. And it's, again, the same people who saw them duking it out in the Wimbledon final. This is the best thing that tennis could have right now, a 16-year age gap, a Serbian and a Spaniard, but a different Spaniard than the Serbian's been playing all these years. And it's so timely given the fact that Roger's gone and Rafa we may not see much of him again in the future.
Yeah. Oh man, well said. It was so fun watching that last night. Okay, let's go back to Coco Gauff, because we said, I mean, look, Steve, she loses first round at Wimbledon to Sophia Kenin, and we're scratching our heads and we're like, the results were even inconsistent up to that point, Steve. Let's be honest, right? It was up and down up to that point. She loses first round in Wimbledon, and we're like, oh boy, and we all talking about the forehand, and her confidence is way down, and where's this going to go? And she makes some changes on her team, right? She makes 2 changes in coaching. Her parents are not always in the stands anymore. That's another thing that was noticed. And Brad Gilbert, who has had success with a number of players now, he's added to the team. What does Coco do since Wimbledon? She wins, if I'm reading my notes, I got a bazillion notes here, but if I'm reading my notes right, she wins 11 of her 12 matches played, Steve, since Wimbledon. That one match, a tough, close 3-set quarter in Montreal. Again, to recap, she wins DC. She quarters Montreal, losing a tight one to Jessie Pegula, and she wins Cincy. The semifinal, what you said earlier on in our conversation, Steve, that was the one. And I said to you, we talked about it before the match. I said she doesn't necessarily have to win this match, but she has to win a set, because she was 0-7 against her, hadn't won a set, 0-14 against Iga. And I said to her, even if she doesn't win, she's got to at least win a set. What happened?
Well, fortunately, it was the first set, and probably she shouldn't have won it. It was very gritty, very gutty on her part, because she was down 4-2, down 5-3, down a couple of set points before the tiebreak, and then raced off to a 4-love lead in the tiebreak and won that comfortably. And that was critical, because even though Iga served and backed up her serve almost impeccably in the second set, which was really almost one-sided, even though it was 6-3, because she was holding so easily. Still, Coco had a foothold in that match, and she really lifted her game in the third set and got up that break and kept protecting it. And the last game of the match was harrowing, with break points and game points, and finally closing it out, because Iga was making a big push at the end to extend this match and to impose her will, and it didn't quite work. And the great thing is that Coco, you don't see her throwing in those double faults anymore. You see her able to sort of she measures her forehand so much better. So she's, I
was going to ask you that. How do you feel? Because we both said in a previous episode, like, Iga's the test, right? The forehand's been looking good, but Iga's the test. What do you think when she's maybe more defensive, she's doing it more heavy, a little bit higher margin for error?
Yeah.
And when she gets in a neutral or more offensive position, she's ripping it. How do you feel the forehand held up in that match?
Yeah, no, I think it's because of the loop. I think the loop is that I remember that's kind of what she was doing on her run to the final of the French Open a year ago. Was like, I was impressed. Oh, wait a minute, she's much sturdier right now. She's getting a lot more balls back, and it was the loop. It's safer. You get it back deep. She gets it above the shoulders of the other player. They come back to her backhand. Maybe she rips the backhand. She's able to sort of get herself in a position to take control of rallies which would not have been possible before. And then she only rips it when she's pretty sure she can hit the winner, or she's very confident that she's set up. Otherwise, I'm keeping this ball in play. I'm going to get plenty of topspin on it. I'm going to keep it deep, and I'm going to keep them off balance. And I thought that's what she did really well. And she may have missed a few more in the Pegula loss. Pegula picked her apart a little bit in Canada, but Jess also played just a great match that day. And Coco overall, I mean, then the great thing was that after she beats Iga, no letdown, and beats Mahova very comfortably in the final. So
yeah, I wanted the end of that match again. It's always hard closing it out, especially when you just beat someone like Iga in the semis. You're going for the title now. Her forehand to me near the end of that match, she got broken once serving for it, and then she wound up holding the second time. But on one of those match points, she did a chop forehand twice. And points where usually you see that squash shot when you're real stretched out. She was not stretched out on those. And I'm like, is she a little tight on this right now?
She was tight, and she just lost her clarity there just briefly, but then got it back and closed it out. The 2-break cushion really helped her. I was surprised that with the 2 breaks, but it's funny. Sometimes players do that. I've even seen Djokovic do that a few times back in 2015, which was one of his best years, where he'd be up. He did it against Roger in the U.S. Open final, where he's 2 breaks up in the 4th set, and then he gave one of them up, and then on a hold for 15-40 the second time to close it out 6-4 in the 4th. And happened to him against Andy Murray the next year in the French final too, where he gave up one of the breaks and it got tense. And it's funny, you figure the second break is going to relax the player, but it doesn't always work that way.
No.
And Coco couldn't get her mind, I think, off the fact that she was about to win the biggest title of her career, a 1,000, which is a big deal, that's going to carry her into the U.S. Open on a wave. I have to say, David, we talked about it after DC. This is no accident. I'm not saying that Gilbert has given her 1,000 new ideas and that she's taken every one of them, but he's had an effect. It's clear to me by her demeanor on the court, by the way she's playing, by the way she greets him after the match.
Clarity, right, Steve? Clarity?
Yeah, complete clarity. And also just a little more swagger out there too. I think he's he just has he's always understood the psychology of this when he worked with the likes of Murray and Roddick and Agassi. And now I kept hoping, when is he going to get another player? I just hope his time is not going to run out here. And sure enough, it did not. And this is ideal for him. And I honestly think it's going to be a long association here, and he's going to continue to have a profound effect on her.
Let me ask you this, Stephen. I kind of texted it to you, and we wanted to save it for a conversation for our podcast. But going into New York, I mean, is Coco for you a top? Forget the ranking. I'm just asking you a current form. Again, a lot depends on the draw, but just looking at the whole body of work, looking at her competitors as well, is she a top 5 favorite for you? I mean, right? I mean, I'm thinking it's just top 5, but think of the names, right? You got Iga, you got Rybakina, you got Sabalenka, you got someone like Ons Jabeur. I mean, there's more. There's a lot of depth in the women's game.
I'll tell you where I would put her.
Jessica Pegula. Where about Jessica Pegula?
Yeah, no, I would put her 3. I honestly would put her 3 in my.
That's a little bit too high for me, but that's interesting.
I'm putting her 3 because on form, and Sabalenka is shaky. She lost to Mahova again. I thought she'd avenge that loss. So did Chanda Rubin, who was making the predictions on Tennis Channel. I thought, yes, she's not going to let that happen again. And she won the first set, went down in 3 kind of tamely. I don't like the way she's been playing. Even Iga, who has to still be the favorite, is coming off losses now to both Pegula and Coco. No disgrace, but she didn't get as much out of the summer as she wanted. And Rybakina has been kind of injury ridden here lately, and she has not been able to produce her best. Ons Jabeur had a little injury again in the course of losing to Sabalenka. Yeah. They all have issues right now. So I say Iga has to be the favorite. Maybe Rybakina possibly next, but I'm saying somewhere in that top 3. Iga clearly won. but I'm putting Coco in the top 3 because I
And
think when
she's going to ride that. If she gets on a run, Steve, she's going to ride that wave, the emotion of that New York crowd. I mean, it is going to be unbelievable as she starts to make her run through this tournament.
And I think the crowd is going to propel Pegula too if she can get on her roll. And yes, she lost early. She didn't do well in Cincinnati, but so be it. She'd come off a big win herself the week before. She can be excused for that. Her consistency need not be questioned.
Correct.
So I think she's going to be ready in New York. She's a crowd pleaser in a very different kind of way, you know. And obviously, Coco has the charisma and there's more flash there, and there's reasons. But Jess is just such a total professional, and so commendable out there. They're gonna, and they know what she's done. The fans are aware that she's been the one that's consistently been right. She's been the one player ranked 3 and 4 in the world. Coco's making her move now to get up to join her up there in that top 5. I think she's going to come in as the number 6 seed, but I think they're both going to get propelled by the crowds in New York. And I still have this dream that somehow they end up on the opposite ends of the draw and just might make it to the final against each other, or at the very least, if they're on the same half, that we could get a semi.
Yeah, that would be something, and the New York crowd would be all over that. They would love every second of that. On the men's side, we're talking about Jesse and Coco. On the women's side, on the men's side, Tommy Paul. I asked you the question last episode. Rate your top 3 men of Tommy, Taylor, and Francis, and you went into it in your analysis. You did a great job with it. To summarize, it was at the time Tommy, Taylor, Francis. The week in Cincinnati, I don't think changes your mind one bit. It's the same type of thing. Tommy Paul plays Carlos again. He beats him whenever we're recording 2 weeks ago. He loses a tight 3-setter to him in Cincy. Crazy windy conditions. But again, if I'm Tommy Paul, I'm like, not only can I play with the number 1 player in the world right now, I can beat the number 1 player in the world, which he's done. His confidence is going to be high. Hopefully the draw suits him well going forward in New York.
Well, Tommy probably should have won the first set from Carlos. He was up 5-2, and then he had 5-3 in the tiebreak, and Carlos was very gritty and came back and won it. And then it looked like Carlos had him, and Tommy fends off Tommy was 2 or 3 times up a break in the second set, and then had to save himself from match points down on his serve, and he did it, and then he wins a tiebreak after saving 3 match points, 7-zip in the breaker. And then, unfortunately for him, he played a loose game at the start of the third, and then there was the delay, a couple more delays because of rain, but still, it was a very good follow-up effort despite the loss. He's going to feel good about himself. Taylor, I don't know. I mean, look, Francis and Taylor started the summer beautifully in Atlanta, hasn't been as good since, got to a semi in his next tournament in DC, hasn't played that well since, and Novak really
was that did that worry you, Steve? That the way, not that he lost to Novak, but I mean the first set was 21 minutes, 6-0.
No, that's what I mean. Yes, it worries me in the sense that he went in, I think, somewhat hopeful. He knew what he was up against, but to lose in 21 minutes and maybe 8 points in the whole set, and then he did go up a break at the start of the second. Novak kind of gave it to him in a way, and he went up 4-2, but then Novak really turned it around with 4 straight games. So he didn't really even salvage much from that set, Taylor. Let's say he'd extended it to a breaker, could have felt pretty good about that. But no, it was love and 4, and it's a thumping, as they say in the trade. And I think it's a tough way for him to go in the Open. He can put it aside. I think he's very good at leaving his disappointments in the past. Very good at that. So I don't worry about that. But I just hope finally in a major we see something bigger from him. Francis got cleaned up by Stan Wawrinka, an inspired performance. But Francis,
Stan was unbelievable that night.
He was. But Francis was not. You know, it's been kind of a flat summer for him. You never know. He can get reawakened in New York again after what happened last year and getting to the semis and taking Alcaraz to 5 hard sets. So there's that memory, but it's also a lot to live up to. He also had a great Open the year before. So it's like, okay, can he do this again? Maybe. I hope so. I hope he's always one that can get very inspired by the crowds. But so I would leave the list the same, because I think Tommy has come off 2 really good performances against Carlos. One he wins and one he loses narrowly. So, but he's playing really well. I like the way he's playing. So that would be my 1-2-3 still is Tommy Paul, Fritz, Tiafoe.
It's so hard. There's so much depth in the game right now. It's so hard. And the draw, no matter who you get, it's just going to be a dogfight pretty much every match. And you just got to win those big points because the margins, both on the WTA and the ATP, the margins, Steve, right now are so slim. I'll say this: if you're in the
But David, let me
area,
just
go ahead,
interject quickly, because you and I have had this discussion and privately, and we've talked about it. And Taylor playing so much tennis, and interestingly enough, that came up the night he played Novak. And Courier was discussing it, I believe, with Jason Goodall, but it just doesn't matter. The subject came up, and one of them said, "Well, Paul Annacone agrees. He plays too many tournaments." And I think he's played 21 now for the year. That also has to change too, so that he can. I don't think he realizes what he's doing to himself by playing that much. It's debilitating more than he knows. And so I hope that maybe that's the formula he's going to need for next year. But at least he's got this week to just practice before he starts in New York, and probably Monday or Tuesday, of the following week. But it was interesting because I know you've been concerned about that. And I said to you, I thought that Annacone didn't like it, and it was confirmed for me on the air by the announcers that he doesn't. And I hope they can get through to him, because he's a very appealing player. I love the backhand, the two-hander. He actually was interesting. He had Novak hitting a lot of backhand slices. Novak didn't want to necessarily slug with him, so Novak was cagey and went to the slice, and it worked. But Taylor, that was out of respect for Taylor's two-hander, how well he hits it. The forehand was a little shaky that night, and the serve, he was, if anything, over-serving, just trying to go for too many 132s and 135s, and he would have been better off to slow it down a little bit. But I hope that I really want to see him turn it around in New York. I mean, because I think he can be a real crowd pleaser when he's on. His game is so appealing.
Let's hope so. Let's hope he does. He's had a few disappointing U.S. Opens recently. So what I was going to say, for those living in the New York area, the qualifying starts tomorrow. Again, we're recording this Monday night. There's going to be 3 rounds of qualifying. If you really want to see guys scratch and claw, I believe it's free, Steve, if you go out there to see the qualifying. I believe it's free. If you want to see some real pressure, and again, pressure is all relative to what your current environment is in. But the last round, the final round of qualifying, basically, Steve, that's an $80,000 payday, because if you can get through that final round of qualifying, and even if you lose in the first round of the U.S. Open, the first round losers get 80,000, which is really, really good. So those guys, that could make most of a guy's year at that level, depending on the person's ranking. So if you can't make it out the first couple rounds of qualifying and you want to see some crazy good tennis, try to make it out there for the final round qualifying. Steve, yesterday was amazing. I'm so glad we did this. We've been going longer than we usually did. We knew that going in, just because of everything with Carlos and Novak and Coco. We want to hit on anything else before we wrap it up? Anything we miss? Anything you want to hit on before we close this up?
No, I think we covered all the ground. It was very, very enjoyable to reflect on that match yesterday and on Coco's great triumph. So no, I think we've covered the ground, I would say, quite well.
This was fun. Let's see if we can get a repeat of this Sunday, maybe in 2 Sundays from now. That's all I'll hope for, something like that, because that was miraculous.
It's a pretty good chance, because it was clear by last year. I mean, I saw this taking shape last year. It's just they weren't together at the same time.
Correct.
Carlos was already on the grass yet last year, and he lost to Sinner at Wimbledon, and then Djokovic beat Sinner and went on to win the title. Djokovic wasn't at the Open.
You mentioned Sinner.
Oh, yeah.
He's the one guy, Steve, that can maybe get in the way of this Alcaraz Novak.
Well, particularly he's had his issues with. Granted, he was 2 sets up on Novak a year ago. This time at Wimbledon, it was straight sets for Novak. But he's consistently played Carlos tough, and he had match point against Carlos last year at the Open. So if they played again, that would be fascinating. I think that he's the one outside of Novak that Carlos fears the most.
And remember, you guys got a day in between. So even if there's a tough semi, it used to be, I mean, they couldn't do it right now. The sport's way too brutal. But it used to be they had the Super Saturday, right? Men's semi, women's final, the second men's semi, then the men's final on Sunday. It was ridiculous. Thankfully, they moved that away. The men's semis are both now on Friday. So you do have that day.
Yeah, just a quick final word, by the way. We didn't mention Zverev. He had a nice week. He finally ended his losing streak. He had all those losses to Medvedev earlier in the season here, 3 of them. And he came back and beat him in a tough 3-setter. Lost a well-played match to Novak, fending off some 3-set points on his serve at 4-5, going to a tie break, extending him to 7-5 in the second set. I feel like he's very close to the old Sasha. So I do think he's going to be kind of dangerous in New York as well. Not to necessarily the point where he'd beat Djokovic or Alcaraz, but where he could probably beat just about anybody else.
Well, I mean, this is going to be something, and there's so many players that can make a deep run, both on the men's side and the women's side. The next time we do this, Steve, we'll have the draw in hand, so we'll probably do this on Sunday, some point on Sunday, and we'll look at some certain players pass and who they're going to have to beat. And again, we normally don't like to look too far ahead because you just can't. We both will wind up looking silly most likely, because when you do that, there's so much depth in the game. There's going to be some upsets, but we'll at least have the draws in hand, and we'll look at some early round matchups, and we'll go over it all. Hopefully, it's a great 2 weeks in New York.
Yeah, I hope so too, David. Looking forward to it, and looking forward to the preview.
Thanks, Steve.